See you. Do sit. Thank you.
People are bound to draw parallels with things that are going on now, and for the Princess of Wales, of course.
Well, it's a completely different case. Whether you draw lessons or not, it's a completely different case. It's a different set of circumstances altogether. I mean, what happened back in the 30s were a set of circumstances which have never been repeated since, and God forbid that they ever should.
What about his German sympathies? Do you think that if Hitler had won the war, he would have been prepared to be king of this country under a Nazi regime?
Again, I mean, it's just such a massive speculation.
There have been suggestions that he may have indeed helped the Germans, even passed on secrets. Did you find any evidence at all of that?
No evidence at all. I mean, there are lots of allegations, but no evidence to substantiate anything like that.
Sir, hello. Hello there. Morning. Morning. Sir, nice to see you. Do sit.
Thank you. Stick me out.
Yes.
You're not actually screaming.
Okay.
Great interest, particularly. All right, okay, everybody ready? Yep. So, did you come out of this exercise admiring Edward VIII?
Yes, I think I did. I mean, I found out a great deal more about the man than I'd possibly imagined that I would. And it wasn't quite what I was expecting, which was also, I think, sort of gratifying. I found somebody who, a much more private person than I'd expected, somebody who actually enjoyed life away from the limelight. You know, all the images that we have, especially, you know, once their life in Paris and the parties and the socialising. But actually, once you get behind that and you get into his love of golf and sport generally, and he was a great supporter of Arnold Palmer. He always used to follow Palmer's fortunes. And he's great gardening as well. He loved gardening, and when I went to the mill, that was one of the things that I mean, although it's a shadow of its former self, I mean, you could still see that the amount of work that he'd done landscaping it and building up the gardens, a lot of help with Russell Page. I just found that was really where the real man was, you know, and that he was a actually very discreet man with it as well.
If you have criticisms of him, of his behaviour, particularly over the abdication and what followed, what would they be?
Well, I wouldn't say that he behaved badly at all about the abdication. In fact, I think he behaved remarkably well. I mean, having taken the decision, he actually dealt with all the paraphernalia of that very quickly. He made his speech, and then he left the country. And it all happened very quickly, very smoothly. There was no prevarication, which allowed the whole transfer of power to go very smoothly and very effectively. That's not to say that, you know, like every person, I mean, he had his flaws, but they were all perfectly human flaws, you know. And I think that, you know, that lack of appreciation of the public opinion about his decision to marry Wallis was that, you know, had an awful lot of problems after that.
Shouldn't he have put duty first rather than his personal feelings?
Good question. At the time, I think that he probably should have done. I think that just given everybody's expectations at that time and the importance of the position, I think that duty was and it was important that he should have perhaps taken more consideration over that. But
you're saying he should have given up Wallis Simpson, should have stayed on the throne?
Well, that's a speculation. There are other alternatives, and maybe it's a shame that some of those alternatives weren't taken.
What alternative particularly, do you think?
Well, there were various other options that they had open to them. And whether it was the morganatic marriage or perhaps giving up, or I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult to tell. We didn't really deal with the abdication in this particular programme. We rather, I mean, one of the interesting things about this particular programme was to try and, I mean, that's all been dealt with. What we really wanted to look at is what happened afterwards. And that's what really became fascinating, because most programmes up to now have always dealt with the abdication as being the final crisis, whereas in fact we used it as the launch point for this film. And so we didn't really get into discussing the rights and wrongs of it. It happened, we just got to accept that. And I'm not going to speculate as to why that happened or anything else. He took that decision and he set off on this road to exile. And the tragedy of this piece is that I don't believe he ever thought he was going to end up in exile.
He was very bitter that Wallis Simpson wasn't allowed to be Royal Highness, Her Royal Highness. Do you think that was a wrong decision?
I don't think he was bitter. I think he was deeply disappointed. I think more than anything else, he wanted her to be his equal, once in marriage. The whole decision about the title, whether or not the family were going to attend the wedding, or the possibility of a job, or indeed him coming back to the country, they were all wrapped up in this same policy decision to try and distance him as far as possible. And that was taken really in consideration of the massive public opinion against Wallis at the time. So, right or wrong, it happened.
Do you think it was right then?
Looking back at it and looking at everything else, I think they probably were right.
People are bound to draw parallels with things that are going on now in the matter of titles, like Royal Highness for the Princess of Wales, of course.
Yes.
Do you think that one should draw any lessons from history?
Well, it's a completely different case. Whether you draw lessons or not, it's a completely different case. It's a different set of circumstances altogether. I mean, what happened back in the 30s were a set of circumstances which have never been repeated since, and God forbid that they ever should. But you basically had the king declaring his intention to marry a divorcee, somebody who was actually already married to her second husband. The public knew nothing about the liaison. So there was an enormous shock factor, and it was very difficult for them to reconcile the king's choice with, once he made it.
Now, what about Edward VIII, as he was for a short time? What about his German sympathies? Do you think that if Hitler had won the war, he would have been prepared to be king of this country under a Nazi regime?
Again, I mean, it's just such a massive speculation that I'm really not prepared to even enter into it. I mean, I mean, there are so many what-ifs, and if we ended up talking about that, I mean, you could end up speculating for hours.
But what about his German sympathies? He did seem to be a bit of an appeaser, didn't he?
Yes, but then so were a lot of other people at the time. A lot of other people who'd lived through the First World War, desperately wanted to avoid anything like that happening ever again. And come on, we're still doing it today. I mean, we're still doing our level best today to avoid ever having to repeat a war like that again.
There have been suggestions that he was rather indiscreet, that he may have indeed helped the Germans, even passed on things, secrets. Did you find any evidence at all of that?
No evidence at all. I mean, there are lots of allegations, but no evidence to substantiate anything like that.
What about his treatment by the rest of the family? What did you make of that?
Oh, well, that was really the tragedy of the piece. I mean, that's what makes, I think, this film so fascinating. And what I found so fascinating about it was that everybody has assumed the abdication was the tragedy. It's not. It's really what happened afterwards, and the tragedy of the family being, effectively split asunder. What was a very close family. All the children had grown up very closely together. So when one of them was effectively forced out, there was a huge, dilemma going on where, the king especially wanting to try and provide some form of comfort to his brother, and yet public opinion, official policy, saying that he couldn't, and that is the tragedy of this story for me and what went on afterwards.
How does your family feel about you doing all this now, delving into the archives, bringing much of the bitterness and the sadness to the surface? There must have been some of them who were not keen on the idea.
No, everybody was actually very supportive. I think it was important that this particular programme in this particular year was made, and was made properly. That we had the opportunity to go back to the primary sources, to really get down to the true basis of where a lot of the stories have come from, where this whole episode took place. To be able to go back to the original, people who actually knew them, the primary sources in all cases, and go back to the places. That was the most important thing. That's what really makes this programme different from all the others.
You say everybody. People are bound to wonder about your grandmother, the Queen Mother. She was right at the centre of the thing. It's been widely known that she was very bitter towards Wallis Simpson. Has she been totally supportive?
No, that's not true at all. She was never bitter towards Wallis at all. She was just put in an impossible position like everybody else, because he married a divorcee. So, none of the royal ladies were in any position to be able to acknowledge her in public society. So it just put an enormous gulf between them. And that was the same for everybody at that time.
So has the Queen Mother been quite happy with you doing this couple of programmes?
Indeed.
Have you spoken to her about it in the course of your inquiry?
Absolutely. I spoke to everybody. So.
But she and no other members of the direct family actually appear on camera?
No, because I didn't think it was important for them to do that.
Do you think that when you look back to the abdication time, you've talked about the great shock it caused and so on, do you think there was rather more respect, if you like, for the royal family then, so it came as greater shock? Do you think a lot of that respect has ebbed away in recent years?
Well, again, we're talking about a completely different set of circumstances here. As I said earlier on, that it was a completely different era. But I mean, and everybody behaved in a completely different way. So it's difficult to know whether those circumstances would ever be repeated. I mean, in the normal course of events, despite the fact that that there is a 60-year difference.
Great pressures on your family now, though, because of marital difficulties among some of its members.
Yes, but then so that's the same for an awful lot of other people. I don't think that's any different from what anybody else is suffering at the moment.
Your own job, you've got this production company going now. Do you find yourself fulfilled with that? Is that a role that gives you great pleasure and satisfaction?
Yes, it does. I mean, obviously, being able to come up with ideas and turn them into reality is always a satisfying experience. And the more that we are able to do, the easier it becomes. But there are always swings and roundabouts and ups and downs and positives and negatives. And obviously, having to go through these particular ordeals is always the downside quite often with these things. But no, it is fulfilling. It is good fun, especially when you can make programs of what I think of this particular quality and standard.
Didn't you say, perhaps I've got this slightly wrong, didn't you say you didn't expect to make any programs touching on the royal family itself? Have you changed your mind about that?
No. What we said was that it would never be the staple diet of Ardent Productions. But we never said categorically that we wouldn't make programs. And we take every case as it comes. We felt in this particular case, it was a very important story to tell, if it could be told in the right way. And by being able to get permission to use and have access to the Royal Archives and the primary sources, we were able really to bring this particular program a look and a feel and an integrity, which we think is very valuable.
Your company lost rather a lot of money at one stage, is that right? Has it been a bit of a struggle to keep going?
No, it hasn't. Like every company, you have to, especially in this particular business, you have to develop. You have to develop ideas, you have to develop relationships. It takes a long time to be able to gain people's confidences. It takes a long time, to develop the projects to a standard at which people, will accept them. And undoubtedly, being, in a sense, who I am and the company that we are, no commissioning editor wants to commission something that they think is just going to be of a mediocre standard. They want the best. If Ardent is going to produce it, then they want the best. So the pressure is on us to be able to come up with almost better than average program ideas before we even start. And we took that really into consideration, and we developed our business plan on the basis it was going to take a minimum of 3 years for this company to be basically up and running, and because it's just a long lead time. First year is development, second year is production. Now into our third year, we're actually beginning to see the product coming onto the screens, and that's the most satisfying element of it.
So are you saying being a member of the royal family, when it comes to business, can be quite a disadvantage?
It does have its problems, yes, definitely, yeah. Everybody. There are pros and cons to everything. And in most cases, the pros marginally outweigh the cons, but it's a pretty close run thing.
Most people would expect every door to be open to you.
So, well, the door's open. It's then what happens afterwards. The expectations then become very much steeper. So, it then. The first part is the relatively easy bit. It's after that the hard work really begins, and it's very serious.
Do you feel in your situation as the youngest of the Queen's children that some of the pressures that obviously apply to others, the Prince of Wales and so on, you don't have those to worry about? You can get on with your own life much easier?
Well, I can't speak for anybody else, obviously, but I would say the pressures are pretty much the same. Other than obviously for the Prince of Wales, who was a sort of different set of pressures. But basically, the public spotlight is so bright and so glaring that you can't avoid it really. You're in it, it's a goldfish bowl, and it's really the same pressures for everybody. I've just, in a sense, managed to develop a slightly different goldfish bowl in which to swim around. But then, you know, the public spotlight comes in on this as well. So I mean, I can't escape from it. You have to live with it.
And the public spotlight is bound to be on your own future plans. Can you tell us anything of those at all?
So I see we've got to the last question in the interview.
Second to last question.
No, that's the last one. Usually it's the last one anyway. So.
Can you tell us anything at all? Do you plan, sir, to get engaged in the next few weeks or months?
So, well, that's new. Most people think I already am. No. No, I'm not saying anything at all. I'm going to keep quiet, and if everybody stops asking me the question, then who knows what might happen.
And how does Sophia Rhys-Jones, how does she manage in this goldfish bowl that you talk about? Did she find it very difficult?
So, well, I can't speak for her.
So thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Thank you for that.
Good.
Super. Thank you
Okay.
very much indeed. Thank you. How long did you say? Was it a year you spent? I mean, that is about the right amount of time.
Yes, about a year.
So you had to get permission to go into them? Yeah, take them off. Take them off.
Yes, anybody can apply. Yeah. People can say, "Oh, well, of course." No, anybody can apply. For me, I actually did some work in the archives when I was at university. So I did at least know my way around there, and I did at least have a credit with them. So hopefully I haven't blended with this one. But yes, it's good to meet you. Thank you very much. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. I should watch it properly. I think it's much better to watch these than to do these things.